Hey everyone, welcome to the conclusion of this sermon series called Bootlegged Jesus, How to Know If Your Faith Files Have Been Corrupted. And I hope this has been good for you. It definitely has been good for me to go through all these different ways in which our faith files sometimes and quite accidentally have been corrupted by maybe it's teaching we received over the years, or maybe it's people's advice, maybe it's culture. But the problem is that sometimes these corrupted files, they become part of what we say we believe about Jesus. And just like if you've ever downloaded a corrupted file before onto your computer, you know that eventually it's going to crash the system. And so the fix, of course, is to get rid of all that stuff and to re-download the uncorrupted file. And so we've been looking at ways to do that when it comes to our faith in Jesus Christ. Because here's where it matters most. Is when you need Jesus the most, when you need to really depend on him with the weight of your life, you need to make sure that you are leaning on the real Jesus, not some corrupted file version of Jesus that actually isn't as good or strong or anywhere near what you need in order for you to get through whatever it is that you're going through. And so we've spent the last 3 weeks looking at different corruptions that are pretty common among people of faith and people who are skeptical of faith. And so just a quick review, let's go over the corruptions that we looked at so far. Corruptions 1 and 2 we saw in week 1, and that is that there's a belief out there that there's no evidence outside the New Testament about the historicity of Jesus Christ and his followers and what his followers believed. And that's just simply not true. There's a lot of evidence outside the New Testament. It's not just circular reasoning. Also, the idea that Jesus' divinity wasn't decided until the Council of Nicaea in 325, some 300 years after the resurrection, is also false. That is a corruption, that Jesus' divinity was from the very beginning, his followers believed. And then that leads to the third corruption, which we looked at the following week, which was, maybe even though his followers believed it, maybe Jesus didn't actually claim to be God. And we saw that that is completely untrue. In fact, that's why Jesus was under trial and determined that he would die for blasphemy, is because he was claiming to be God. And then last week we looked at the common corruption, which is that it says that following Jesus is about following the rules. And if you don't live your life thus and so, you're not really following Jesus. And you always kind of wonder, you're like, who's creating those rules, right? And how do they get to decide what determines me following Jesus? And of course, we find out that Jesus actually isn't about that. That Jesus isn't like a referee waiting to blow the whistle on your mistakes or penalize you for your behavior, but rather, he's more like a coach. It's not that the rules don't matter to the coach. The rules are a huge part of the game. But it's just that. You know the rules so that you could get the most out of the game. You know the rules so that you can play the game with joy. And the coach is there to encourage us, to train us, to teach us, to applaud us, and yes, sometimes even to discipline us. But it's all through relationship. A referee is an impartial bystander. A coach is a trusted friend. And so what we learn and our big takeaway from last week is this, is that God is much more interested in our hearts than our adherence to the rules. So today, we are talking about kind of the last corruption that often comes in a lot of people's faith journey, and that is what they believe Jesus' love looks like in action. And I think the reason why this gets corrupted is because our world, the whole branding of love, is convoluted. Right? It's all about kind of chasing a feeling. And that your whole life's goal is to chase that feeling of love no matter where it leads you. I often use this in my wedding sermons. If you've ever been to a wedding that I do, I always tell this story. I say that if I want to fall in love, it's sort of like what I've learned. I've learned the recipe from romantic comedies. Now, maybe you've seen a few romantic comedies before. But this is really the formula if I want to fall in love and I'm single. I have to meet someone in this really cute but quirky way, like maybe we're both exiting a coffee shop and I bump my head or she drops her drink and I say, oh man, let me go buy you another coffee. And we go in, and then, there's a janitor in the back sweeping up because they're closing the place down, and we're just, eyes are locked, and we're talking, and we're really into each other. And then I invite her over for dinner, and I go to the store, and I come back with a paper bag that's got a French baguette sticking out of it, and I pour the wine, and she's very impressed with the meal that I've made. And we gaze into each other's eyes, and we kiss, and oh my gosh, it's fireworks and sparks. But then she's got this one skeptical friend who doesn't really like me, and I don't even really know why, but kind of convinces her that I'm really a jerk. And really, there's a series of misunderstandings that makes it look like I am a jerk, but I'm really not. And it's actually the skeptical best friend that figures out that I'm not a jerk and goes and tells her. And then, oh my gosh, he was really a good guy all along. And so we're running toward each other in the rain, always in the rain. And we kiss, we embrace, we kiss, and then bam, we are in love. I always wanted to see the sequel to those stories, like the couples therapy that they that they need to go through. But the point is this. I think for a lot of us, what we hear, and I think it transfers to our faith, is love equals chasing after an emotional feeling and to follow your heart no matter where it leads. And so this is corruption number 5. To love is to follow your heart. Now, this might actually upset you because you might be thinking, well, yeah, follow your heart. Your heart's not going to steer you wrong. I don't know. I've had my heart steer me wrong before. But let's talk about this a little more. Let's unpack it. Let's talk about love in Jesus' way, God-sized love. What does it look like? Well, Jesus talks a lot about what it is to love one another. So if we turn to our scripture now, this is John 15, verses 9 through 14. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. He says this, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command." Now, those verses sound really great. And we read them and we might feel kind of warm and fuzzy about the love that Jesus has. But this is a really difficult passage. Why? Because he's defining love for us. So let me ask you this. How would you define love? Maybe you might think of, again, a feeling that you have, a willingness to put somebody else above you. You think about relationships. You think about kind of the wonderful feelings that you get from these relationships. You think about your children. You think about other things. You think about your job, maybe. You think about your hobbies. You think about vacations. You think about the things that you love. The problem is our earthly and human definitions of love don't really get us to what it means to have God-sized love. In other words, you can't just talk about human love and then extrapolate it and say, well, God's love must be something much greater than that. I mean, that's true, but that's not really how you get there. God makes it much more concrete for us. You see, in order for God to show us what his love is like, he knew that he couldn't just tell us about it. And so we read in Scripture a lot of things about God's love. But you see, if you want to make a mathematical equation, whenever you have the word is, when you're doing a word problem, is that you put an equal sign. And in Scripture, it says God is love. God equals love. So therefore, the definition of love is God. What exactly does that mean? Well, what God did was he became one of us in Jesus Christ. He came so that he could show the world what it looks like to live with God-sized love. So if you want to know what the definition of love is, you look at Jesus. Jesus is the definition of love. And so Jesus says this, right? My command, love each other as I have loved you. Well, how did he love his disciples? Or how does he, in turn, love us? Well, there's a lot to say on this, and it's all throughout Scripture. But let me just point you to a couple. There's that very famous, we're talking about romantic comedies, but talking from weddings, that section from 1 Corinthians comes up all the time. And that is that love is patient. But think about that. Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It doesn't dishonor others. Love is not proud. It's not self-seeking or easily angered. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. If you were to read that over and over again, and if you were to kind of transpose that on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, you would see Jesus living out that expression of love in all that he did, all that he said. And so we could say Jesus equals God-sized love. And he came to show us what it looks like to live with that kind of love. Now, if we stop there, we would have a pretty rich definition of love. But that's not all of it. We have to remember this too. If we're looking at Jesus and he is love, we have to look at some of the other things that he did and what that means about our definition of love. The first is love sometimes rebukes. Love sometimes corrects wrong thinking. I'm thinking about the time when Jesus, turns to Peter. Peter just called him the Messiah. He gets the right answer, and he turns around a few minutes later and says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Right? I mean, talk about a rebuke or a correction. Why? Because Peter was suggesting that Jesus not go through what he needed to go through in order to save us all. And he had to correct him on that. You see, I think sometimes we get the idea that love is only about the positive, good feeling stuff, but sometimes love is about correcting. And this is why we can't trust a definition that simply says follow your heart, because your heart's going to want whatever you want, and whatever you want is broken by sin. So sometimes following your heart is going to lead you further from God. It's going to leave you more broken. So it's not just about following our feelings. Sometimes it's about being corrected. It's about doing the thing that we don't want to do. Sometimes that is love. Sometimes love challenges us. Jesus challenged people all the time. Love is also sacrifice in the deepest way that you could. And that's what Jesus did when he laid down his life. Think of it this way. Jesus, who had the power at any time, you talk about the Avengers, and Thanos could snap his fingers, and half of reality. Jesus had more power than that. And yet, he willingly laid down his life for ours. That is love. And if we take seriously his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before, in that moment, his heart didn't necessarily want to follow that feeling. That's why he had to pray, not my will, but yours. That is love. See, love isn't about following your heart. I think what we see in Jesus is it's about following the Father's heart. That is the definition of love. Jesus continues in this next passage from John chapter 12, verses 27 through 36. I'm going to read this for you because this is so, so important and maybe even counterintuitive to what we understand about love. This is Jesus when he's predicting his death. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He had said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. "We have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man?" Jesus told them, "You are going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light." When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. This is a challenging passage, but again, let's look through it through the lens, Jesus equals love. Do you hear what he's saying here? He's saying something that I don't think you want to hear. I know that I don't really want to hear it, but it's this. Love is all these things that we talked about. And yes, love also rebukes and corrects and challenges and sacrifices. But you know what else love does? It judges. You can't take judgment away and still have love. That might sound crazy, but let me unpack it for a second. If there's no punishment for sin, if there's no punishment for wrongdoing, that's not really love. In order to have right, you have to punish the wrong and reward the right. It's just like, any of you parents out there, you know this to be true, or even if you're not a parent, you were parented, and you know that if you just let your kids do anything they want, if they could just follow their heart wherever it leads them in any given moment, that's not love. Love requires judgment. Now, I don't mean like judging other people. Yeah, that's not what Jesus says, but a heavenly judgment. A judgment that says, no, that is sin. That is wrongdoing. That is not the will of the Father's heart. See, love isn't just about chasing a feeling. It's not about your heart. It's about following the Father's heart. Remember what Jesus said. He said, "You are my friends if you do what I command." In other words, love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. It's a choice to do what the Father commands. Very simply put, and this was a great book written by Bob Goff, love does. Love is active. Love is something that you do. It's not just something that you feel, it's something that you choose. For example, if I say that I love my wife, I have to back it up with my actions. Otherwise, that's not really love. It's just saying that I love. It's pretend love. I have to actually do what I say I'm going to do. So if the world says this, the world says love is a feeling that leads to a choice. But I think God says this, love is a choice that leads to a feeling. Because let me tell you something, nothing in the world feels better to know and to truly be known, and in all of our imperfections and brokenness, to choose to love, even when our heart doesn't want to. Wow. That's God-sized love. Maybe a good question to end with is this. How will you today choose to love? And how will that choice lead you and guide you, not just based on what your heart wants, but what the Father's heart wants for you and in you and through you? Any other version of that, any other version of love that you might hear, particularly when it comes to Jesus, is, well, it's a bootleg version. Don't let this faith file be corrupted. This is everything. This is the heart of the gospel. Let us choose to love today. Amen.